What do you think of when someone talks about debt? You typically feel overwhelmed, panic maybe even like you did something wrong. Like we are taught to avoid debt at all costs. But what if I were to challenge that and tell you that actually debt can be a very useful key to building financial independence? If you want to find out how debt can be useful to help you build wealth, listen here today on Mindset with Brad Barrett. Let's go. Welcome everyone back to Mindset. My name is Brad Barrett. This is producer Jared. And today we're gonna talk about how you can build wealth using debt. I actually titled the video of this, Can I Build Wealth Using Debt? The answer is yes, thanks, goodbye. I'm kidding. We're gonna talk about it because a couple of weeks ago, we actually did a video that I think is really important on tips to get out of debt. And in that video, I actually mentioned that there are ways to use debt. Now, for those of you out there that are thinking and clicked on this video, like wondering what this guy has to say about debt and good debt versus bad debt, which is really what we're gonna be focusing on today. All you Ramsey Knights out there, love the guy, have nothing bad to say, but I do differ on this one point. Friends, end of the day, we live in a debt-based economy. It's just a fact.
The late, great Lionel Richie once said, "Oh, what a feeling. I am dancing on the debt ceiling."
In fact, so much so, as of February 18th, okay, about a week ago, 2 weeks ago, in 2025, the US national debt, I don't know how to say this, Jared, but I'm gonna try it. Okay, maybe we can put it up on the screen here.
Try it.
Okay, ready? The US national debt, our government, us as a country, the debt was $36,292,592,701,106.67. Did I get that right?
Exactly right, which is
Okay.
a big number.
Billions and 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 billions and
That's a lot. Now, for those of you out there who heard me say this before, I'm a big believer that our government overspends. I'm just gonna say it. It's a fact, right? Now, here's the thing though, when I have clients saying, well, aren't we worried about the national debt and all this kind of stuff? I'm not worried about the national debt as much as the next person. And here's my reasoning. No different than you would likely be worried about. Now, people differ, but hear me out. Most of my clients that I work with aren't worried about a $30,000 mortgage on a $200,000 property. Where'd I get those numbers? We as a country, if we took all of the assets the government owns, all the things that we got, is probably north of $200 trillion. So we owe 36 trillion on 200 trillion. As long as we make the debt payments, it's decent. I'm not gonna get in a rant on that, and you can comment on that all you want. You can say, Brad, you're crazy, whatever. All I'm saying is context matters here. And to bring more context for a second, we talked about some of these stats in our last show that we'll put the link to. I wanna kind of double down on this. In 2024, last year, the US consumer debt, you and I, reached a record high of 18 trillion in the fourth quarter. This was a month or two ago, right? This is a 13% increase from 2020, just 5 years ago. Think about that.
Debt is on the rise.
Debt is on the rise.
This is going to cost you. Put it on my tab.
So again, we live in a debt-based economy. Now, before we talk about the types of debt, good debt and bad debt, I actually do want to sit here for a second and talk to all of you poignantly about how you were raised and your philosophies toward debt. Because I know I have mine. Jared, I mean, I'm sure you have yours.
Yeah, I mean, I was raised, I guess directly or indirectly, but debt was a bad thing. Never have debt, always clear. We operate in the black no matter what.
Yep.
I remember having this conversation, probably about 10, 15 years back with my brother who built a real estate company using debt.
Yeah.
His philosophy was always be in debt.
Mm-hmm.
Let other people's money make you money.
Yep.
So he was always carrying hundreds of thousands in debt,
Yeah.
building a company and making a lot of money doing it, where I was trying to get out of debt. And that was my goal, was just to be free and clear.
Yeah.
So it was a big philosophy change for me that was like, I just couldn't fathom carrying that much debt. It was like the stress, I couldn't handle it.
So now to bring the financial advisor into that conversation, like if I were sitting with you and your brother and you guys were duking it out as bros do, the main differentiator in making it worth it or successful, if you will, is this word called arbitrage. Said differently, if you borrow low and earn higher than what you're borrowing, that delta, that difference, that's your arbitrage. That's your profit. So yeah, if you're gonna go borrow at 3% and you're investing in something that's making 5%, right, as an example, you're making 2%. And as long as that 3% is fixed and that's a relatively secure 5%, I mean, nothing's guaranteed in life, but if it's relatively secure and hypothetical, you can make a pretty good pro forma as a business plan on that notion, right? Mm-hmm. Why I want to sit on that and bring that up is because we brought this up, actually, I think it was last week on our show about emotions and kind of finding out who you are. This is what I mean by that. Like finding out who you are as a person has a lot to do with how you relate to money. Like your brother, that was his ethos. That's how he was wired, and he was good with it. And by the way, if you watch him right now, you might relate to Jared's brother in this case, right? Others might relate to Jared himself. And I'm probably in between, personally. Not that either one is right or wrong, it's arbitrage and does it make sense? And that actually leads into that's a perfect segue, I think, into the bad debt environment, because that's where you start to lose arbitrage. So I want to talk with the bad debt first. Bad debt is debt that doesn't provide a long-term benefit or improve your financial situation. That's how I would label bad debt.
It sounds bad. Yes.
It sounds bad.
Yeah.
And here's the three things I bring up is it's high interest, it's not deductible, and it's not for an asset. Those are three key terms that I would bring up in bad debt. However you use the debt, if it's higher interest, not deductible, and not for an asset, I would consider it, you may want to talk to your advisor about this, it's probably not the best debt.
And so for me, the first thing that pops in my mind is credit cards.
Credit card. Because credit cards, they often have high interest rates. And they're great in the 70s when credit was issued and we started using credit.
Money's not a thing to me anymore, because I just charge to the game.
Yeah, not with that credit card. You can get whatever you want, whenever you want. It's all like free, basically.
Yeah, it's awesome.
The idea was for uh-ohs. We talked about this before on our debt show a couple weeks ago, right? It's for the, hey, AC needs to be fixed. The tires blew out on both my wife and I's car. The dog needs to go to the vet. The kids' co-pays, it's during flu season. I mean, you can name it, right? And it's above what we're bringing in. Mm-hmm. The problem with that is, over the past 50 odd years, it's been marketed to, and we all know this through social media and everywhere else, it's marketed to us subliminally, like we have to have that new pair of whatever. You fill in the gap there on what it is for you, and now all of a sudden you feel like you have it. I mean, look, at the end of the day, we've all been in situations in our life where it's necessary, so you really have to quantify for yourself if it's needs-based. If it's wants-based, definitely I would say please avoid that. Meaning, if I don't go secure this loan, I'm not going to pay rent, or my mortgage is going to default. That's a big deal. But if you're taking this on because you overspent on some sneakers that month, I'd probably avoid that.
And what about hey Brad, what about the 0% APR credit card that I just signed up for? First year, no interest, no payments.
So that's always a tricky one. I have that all the time. And look, end of the day, that's fine. I always say it's fine if you pay it off within the 6 months before the 0% becomes 22%. Sure, fine. So be careful of things that are high interest, not deductible, and not for an asset. Those are things. Not just credit cards, but just loans in general that are high interest. Again, think of it as arbitrage, right? Borrow low, invest in something that's earning higher than what your borrow rate is. If the interest rate is high, whether it's a high private loan, hard money loan, safety line through credit unions, things like that, if it's anything in that camp, higher interest rates probably not the best debt if you can avoid it. So all in all, in talking about bad debt, I think one of the step one in all of this is, in order to help you build wealth and get ahead financially, is avoiding bad debt. I think that's just a key point here, which I think is a perfect transition into talking about good debt.
That's where you make the money.
It's where you make the money. So what is good debt? To me, good debt tends to be debt that allows someone to achieve meaningful personal goals or could lead to long-term financial gain. Notice what we put in there, long-term. I'm not saying you're gonna make money tomorrow or next month or next year. Arbitrage works through compound interest and time, okay? So when I use long-term financial goals, I think that's wise. Now, the three things I said to avoid in bad debt are the same three things inverted for good debt. Low interest, invested for an asset, and typically deductible. The number one thing that comes up, let's just talk about it, we've already been talking about, is mortgages.
Mortgages.
Right? The definition of low interest rate is somewhat subjective, but suffice it to say that anything that's in single digits is relatively lower interest than, say, double digits.
Historically, yeah.
Historically speaking.
We're still, I think, over there all, 30, 40 years, we're still kind of in a low on the average.
We are. I mean, most of us, anyone who's watching this right now who was, buying a house in the 80s, you were, paying 13% mortgages. So mortgages still is probably the top thing on that list, where it's lower interest rate, it's for an asset, and it's deductible. So Schedule A deductions on your taxes. Now, again, not being a tax preparer, Being an advisor who talks very eloquently about taxes, speak with your advisor about this, but typically mortgage interest is deductible depending on whether or not you itemize or take standard or how you look at it.
And we went into mortgages first, and this is for most people, one of their biggest assets
Yep.
that they own. So if I am looking to start my wealth building journey, is a mortgage going after a home an important first step, or do you start looking at the stock market?
Good question.
Like, to me, it seems like when I spent 20 some odd years until recently bought a house, like I was pumping in rent money to some stranger. Now I'm pumping it back into myself. Like, it feels like a huge, like a mandatory first step.
I think I'd ask that question this way. I'd flip it around and say, do you feel, you and Amy, do you feel more like you did something right now that you're monthly paying to yourself in the mortgage versus the rent?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So regardless of what I say or anyone else says, I think the mentality shift of feeling like you're renting, throwing away money versus mortgages, if it feels better to you, then that's a win. Because I could sit here on the other side and say, and I have a lot of clients coming in. So let's flip that around for someone who's in their 20s, just recently married maybe, or not married, whatever, just looking to buy a home, to your real question, which is, should I buy that first? My comment always becomes that I make sure I sit with clients and just ask them point blank, are you doing this because you want to, or are you doing this because this is quote unquote the American dream and you feel like you need to?
Isn't this exciting? Moving into a new home, taking out a ridiculous mortgage. I'm gonna be in debt my whole life. Yes!
Because I feel like there's a notion here, let's just be candid, that if we're healthy, we're after college or in our 20s, we have a good paying job, a stable income, that the next thing we should do is buy a home. Would you agree with that statement? Across the board, as the American economy.
Philosophically speaking, yes, I would agree with that statement. It's like the next logical step: college, marriage, home.
That's that kind of like
children.
American dream thing,
Yeah.
but like not everyone, I guess what I'm trying to say is not everyone subscribes to that.
Sure.
People get married later, they have kids later, there's different things going on in the 20s, and my experience, if you want my experience, has been that people are still moving around and trying to find out who they are in their 20s.
No, it's absolutely true.
And so playing roots with a home purchase, it sticks you to that.
That is
renting,
true.
renting can be a little bit of an asset to you through the ability to have the asset be flexibility. Like, people value that, right?
No, I see. It's a good point. I mean, if you're ready to make that move and settle down, that is probably a great point. If you're not, it could almost be a hindrance to your lifestyle. There's
some boxes I feel like need to be checked before we answer that, saying yes. If you're in those camps, then yes, the next best move is that.
Yeah, it's just hard when you see, like, there's a stat here, since 1991, home prices have risen an average of 319% overall. 5.7 in the last year alone, according to the Federal Housing Finance Agency.
Yeah.
So when you see those numbers, it's like, how much, what else might get that?
But that number, that percentage is a gross number. If you take the average annual, just take the last year's 5.7, still the average 30-year forecast is around 5.
Okay.
So, by the way, those stats come up a lot. If you're Googling this right now and you kind of see what that is, remember, context is everything.
Yeah.
You know, people will say 300, what was that, 397%? Or was it?
319%.
319%, you're like, oh my gosh, like I'd be stupid not to invest in. Well, wait a minute, that's since 1991, it's 2025.
Yeah.
Right, what is that, 34 years? You know what I mean? So you have to understand that what's the average per year, right? Now, I'm not gonna do the math on it, but I know the numbers are still around 5%. In fact, our wealth forecasts, our financial plans we do for clients, we estimate 4 to 5% of appreciation in our real estate planning. That's the number I think is more valid. And yes, it's a good investment, but it's an illiquid one, right? So you have to value it as more of like, I'm building a home, I'm planting roots, I'm gonna raise a family in here, and yes, it's gonna ultimately be a good investment for me later down the road.
It is a top asset to invest in, to use debt to gain when the timing is right and you're ready to do that.
Correct. That's my philosophy. I mean, people might have opinions on that, but yeah, I do.
Makes sense.
And again, on the 3 debts that are good debt, low interest, deductible, foreign asset, that's the one I bring up all the time, but there's other ones too. Student loans, I think, are one that people don't talk about a whole lot, but they are. They're typically not high interest. They're typically 6 and 7s, maybe 8% out there. It's typically deductible on a 1098, depending on your income. You can talk to your CPA about that. It's for an asset. You're the asset. I hope you got some sort of degree that you can use in the capital markets.
Well, that's the key.
That's
Many
the key.
don't, but
some
yeah.
don't, and that's that's the choice you're choosing here. Okay, you can't choose a path and then expect people to bail you out of it. All right, it is what it is. But my point is, student loans are great. Another one of good debt.
Yeah, and student loans, I would say, be careful which student loans you get. Some of the federal ones subsidized, but you can also get into some of these private student loans that you can get real backed up in.
Yeah. Another one that comes up is typically business loans. If you fully believe in the purposeful project that you're doing in a business, right? You're employing people, you can take lines. That is an okay thing if you're investing it back in the business where you can make money. That's arbitrage. Again, good debt has those characteristics. They're more characteristics I'm bringing up of, again, low interest, deductible, foreign asset, right? The three I'm bringing up right now are student loans, mortgages, and business loans because they hit those camps. There's some caveats to some of those things, but it's foreign asset. You're investing it.
A couple inspirational stories to back this up.
Okay.
So Starbucks in 1971, they pulled together $8,000 and took in a small loan to start selling coffee beans. Now they're worth $80 billion.
Yeah.
Subway, founded in 1965 with $1,000 borrowed from a family friend. Now they have 40,000 locations. And one of my all-time favorites is, the game Trivial Pursuit?
Yeah.
Basic group of friends had this idea, and for this board game trivia, so they went to their basic 32 of their closest friends and said, hey, you want to invest in this? So they basically pulled together about 30 grand in 1979, so it's a considerable amount of money.
Really?
From friends and family. And it's pulled in $1 billion since then.
That's crazy.
So when you look at these, like, $1,000 wasn't a lot back then. 40,000 was a considerable amount back then. Probably couple hundred grand in today's money.
Yeah.
If you look at the mindset of what that takes to borrow from friends, to borrow from a bank, to hold that loan.
I was going to say, it's not so much the dollar amount, it's the weight of the dollar amount.
The weight.
It's the weight of it. It's you borrowed from a friend, or the weight, or a family member, or it's the weight of I just took on debt.
Yeah.
And it manifests itself in your body somehow.
No,
and it's like now you owe somebody.
I can feel that stress. I can feel that thing. And I tell you, the more knowledgeable I get about it, now with a mortgage, with student loans that I have, some of the stuff, it's really, you start to welcome it when you know what it's doing for you.
Exactly. If it's working for you, again, if it's creating time and freedom for you down the road, if it's creating a roof over your head from a home perspective for your family, these are all values that lessen the stress, the cortisol level that's going to be spiked in your body by taking on that debt. And those are great success stories. And I'm sure many of you, I would love to hear other success stories that you guys may know about in the comments. Let us know, because this is the fun stuff. But we can't gloss over the fact that for every one of those stories, there's probably 10 stories of failed ones where they didn't maybe truly understand the bad debt situation, or they got out over their skis, which is typically what happens on their debt. Yeah. That's typically what happens. Most times people say, well, Brad, it was just a bad bet, or the investment didn't pan out. It coulda, shoulda, woulda.
Or bad timing.
Bad timing. There's a lot, and I hear that, and I'm not saying that's not true, but typically my experience has been with working with a lot of clients over many, many years, myself included, at being a business owner here. It's typically not the investment that is being made, it's typically it's the debt that was taken on to do the investment.
Yeah.
It's typically getting out over your skis, paying too much in interest rate, taking too much loan to value, let's put it that way, on the current loan, or the current value of whatever it is you're loaning against. That's typically where it's done. So that's good debt, bad debt. I want to end on a couple things though. One, there are some gray area debt. We talked about one of them, which is the buy now, pay later, transferring the 0% APR interest cards. We talked about it a little bit, but the main one I want to bring up is the vehicles. Okay, I got to talk about this.
That's a good one.
All right, because I'm sure you probably are thinking about this. I brought up business loans, I brought up student loans, I brought up mortgages. The other main loan that most of my clients have, including I technically own my cars now, but for many, many years, I would either lease or finance my cars. So here's the thing. To me, this is actually geographic. If you're in New York right now, don't own a car. You got plenty of transportation through your subways.
Sure.
I'm being somewhat facetious with that, but catch my drift. Why? Go use the subway. It's cheaper and you got plenty of transportation, plus parking there's a nightmare, right? If you're in Los Angeles, where I am, having a car isn't so much as a luxury, it's more of a utility. We have to have a car to get around here. It just is what it is. Now, do you need to be driving an $80,000 BMW? No. So I am not going to sit here and say that having a vehicle loan is good or bad. I will say this, technically, it falls in that gray area, which is like, this is like right in the middle, because it has characteristics of both good debt and bad debt. Because it's typically lower interest rate. It's typically single digit. Like right now they're in the 8s. It's still high, but it's in the 7 or 8s, okay? They're not double digit. And technically, it is an asset. The problem with that though is it hits the other side, which is it's a depreciating asset. There's an old rule of thumb. When you buy a car, finance it or whatever, when you buy a car, as soon as you put the key in and drive it off the lot, it's worth about 10% less than what you bought it for. End of the day, a vehicle loan's a gray area. I understand it for a lot of my clients because it is a utility. I just typically challenge them on how much they're willing to pay and what value proposition they're putting on the car that they want.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Should I borrow money to invest in the market?
No. No.
Because theoretically, you're like, oh,
okay.
if I take this out,
there was an advisor I had years ago that I used to work with that would do this. When rates were really low, and I remember thinking this was like, I didn't like this, man. And I remember I was young in the business. I was my first investment house, and I was kind of like, this seems a little odd. I understood the philosophy. So when I say no, put it with an asterisk and hear me out. Arbitrage can still work for you, okay? So the philosophy was go take a line of credit at a fixed rate for 3% on your house when mortgages were like nothing, right? You still had plenty of loan to value in the house, and you take that money and you go invest it where the stock market's average return is around 9-10%. So on theory, on paper, you're like, okay, I'm borrowing at 3, I'm making 10. I'm like, dude, that's
as
arbitrage.
soon as when you started talking about that money at the beginning of the show, I started thinking, well, if I took a fixed loan and got these numbers.
Totally, and here's the risk, or here's the situation is, you're still taking on risk. So as easy as I'm making this sound, it doesn't mean just without its volatility, because you still have to make enough money to make the payments on the debt you borrowed. So that's a key thing too, right? Don't forget, there's cash flow owed on the debt borrowed. Have people done it? Sure. Okay, people made money at it? Absolutely. Would I advise on that typically? Probably not, and it's a very specific clientele that would be right for that. Look, can you build wealth again on debt? The answer is yes, but you could use good debt and it still not turn out for you. Even good debt is not without its risks. Remember, if you owe somebody, they have rights on you. So someone says, oh, I own my house. I'm like, well, you really don't. Unless your mortgage is lower than 50% of the loan to value, you technically don't own it, right? The bank owns it.
But at some point, if you want to get ahead in your wealth, you're going to have to take the risk on for some of this good debt.
Calculated risk, yes.
Yeah.
I think the ones that take on the risk, when you say, okay, I got to build wealth, I got to take on risk, and I agree with that, but you can take a calculated approach, and I still think you need to have time involved. Trying to do it right away is not a good recipe.
Yeah.
Time will always be the main factor, the differentiator. That separates the men from the boys, as they say, is time. Can you weather the storms? Can you weather the volatility, the ups and downs, staying the course? This is true of investing in general, let alone for using debt or not. It's just investing 101 in general. And by the way, just to be clear, you can build wealth without debt too, very easily, right? Investing in the right things, managing your cash flow, right? Those are all things, because end of the day, if you lined up somebody, let me give you a quick example when we'll put a bow on this way. If I have someone on paper, if I have two net worths of $1 million, person A, person B, both worth $1 million. But you looked at what got to that, person on the assets on the left side here, person's assets are $1 million, zero debt. Person on the assets over here is $2 million, $1 million of debt, it's the same net worth. Yeah. So if that brings it home a little bit here, there are different avenues to take to build wealth. Today's focus was understanding on can you build wealth with debt? The answer is yes. It's just making sure you know the difference between good debt and bad debt. But I do want to be clear, if you're a person who says, I hear you, Brad, but I fall into the camp where I just was ingrained that I'm supposed to not have debt, or I lose sleep at night having debt, then that's okay. Be over here. Be this side. Invest wisely and manage your outflow and manage debt, and you're going to be just as fine. Because remember, you can get to the same net worth.
Or dip your toes in it. Buy something, see how that debt feels. Build up. For me, now I'm way more comfortable now that I have a home, I have some other these things, I see what it's doing. I'm more comfortable with that now than I was 10 years ago.
And that's a good point, because look, we all change. There's seasons of life, there's ages and stages of this world that we all live in. So you might be this way now and you might evolve. So I do think it's worth trying some things, but doing, that's why I wanted to do today's show, is if you do try the debt environment, make sure you understand the difference between good and bad debt, because debt can be good if used right. Just be careful it doesn't swallow you up. That's kind of the last thing I want to say there.
That's great. Perfect.
Next week, we're going to be here talking about
4 assets, non-financial assets that you need to invest in.
We are. That's actually a good one. That's a really good one, because we talk about investment accounts, but we're going to talk about things in this world that are actually really valuable to us, that are big investments that we all should make. And there's 4 of them that I'm going to bring up.
And that's building wealth that's not financial wealth, in my opinion.
Bingo.
Personal well-being wealth.
I love it. Thank you all for joining. As always, please don't forget to subscribe, like our videos, share, comment. We love to hear from you guys. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, if you lead with love, man, this world's going to be okay. I'll catch you next time.